Welcome back to Madman Review. You know those big bore calibers that totally changed the game, setting records and making handguns way more versatile? The ones that had us all rushing to online forums, hyped to grab one as soon as the local gun shop swung open its doors? Well, guess what? In this video, we're not talking about any of those. Nope. We're diving into the world of cartridges that crashed and burned so hard that most people don't even know they existed. Welcome to our rundown of the top 5 big bore cartridges that were epic fails. We're talking about those calibers that just never took off, the ones that make you scratch your head and go, seriously? What were they thinking with this mess? These are the cartridges that missed the mark with their intended crowd. Pun intended. Didn't perform as expected or just never gathered a cult following. So kick back and get ready for a tour of the biggest big bore flops in history. Number 5, 41 Action Express. Kicking off at number 5, we've got the weakest big bore caliber on this list, ballistics-wise, the 41 Action Express. So, what's the deal with it? Is it like a neutered 41 Magnum but for semi-autos? The same dude, Evan Wilden, came up with it in 1986. The 41 AE was basically a trimmed-down 41 Magnum brass casing with a rebated rim to match the ballistics of the 9mm NATO. There were 2 big goals here. One was to create a round that could fit into a semi-auto pistol the same size as a 9mm and still pack a punch like a 41 Magnum police load. Honestly, not a bad idea at all. Pistols could switch up with a new barrel and magazine, and even the Israeli military's Uzi submachine guns got in on it for a bit. The other goal was to push a 170 grain bullet up to at least 940 feet per second, and it did that no problem. Some makers even got their 170 grain rounds to hit 1,215 feet per second, which is right up there with the 10mm auto. So, it had pretty good ballistic potential, and all of it was useful. But despite it all, something just didn't click. Even though it was used in the Jericho 941, aka the Magnum Research Baby Eagle, the Taurus PT-92, and the IWI Uzi, the 41AE just didn't catch on, and there are a couple of solid reasons for that. First off, by 1986, the 10mm auto was already around. It wasn't super common, but it was there if you wanted more oomph than a 9mm, but less than a 10mm. The 41AE could fill that gap, but then the 40 Smith & Wesson showed up in January 1990 and pretty much ended the 41AE's run. The 40 S&W could do everything the 41 AE did, and there was already plenty of brass and bullets for it. Plus, the 10mm had been on the scene since 1983. Second issue was practicality. The bullets for the 41 AE were mainly for the 41 Magnum, which itself wasn't exactly flying off the shelves. With other calibers that can match it ballistically being more readily available, and with the 41 AE dealing with scarce ammo and components, production became more and more difficult. In the end, the 41 AE had to be quietly taken out of the game. Number 4, 45 Gap. Coming in at number 4, we've got the 45 Glock auto pistol, or the 45 Gap. Now, some might argue that this caliber isn't a complete flop since ammo is still being made and Glock is still churning out guns in 45 Gap. And yeah, Bond Arms offers barrels for their Derringers in 45 Gap too. Okay, fair enough. But hear me out. The 45 Gap is basically a 45 ACP but shorter by 0.143 inches or 3.6 millimeters with a beefier case head. And to make up for the smaller powder space, it runs at 45 ACP plus P pressures, which is about 23,000 psi. If you've ever handled a Glock 21 or 30, you know they're bulkier to fit the 45 ACP. Glock's big idea was to pack 45 ACP powder into a standard size Glock. Sounds awesome, right? But then there's the high ammo cost and less room for bullets. Sure, you shorten the round, but it's still a 45. So it's wide, takes up more space in a smaller gun. In a full-size Glock 45 gap, you're looking at 10 rounds max. What's the big deal with that? Hey, California and all you other states with capacity limits, no need for your 2 cents here. So yeah, capacity. You get 10 rounds of 45 gap in a standard Glock or 15 rounds of 40 S&W, which is also a solid choice. Going for something compact like the Glock 19 or 23, you're down to 9 rounds. I carry a Glock 30S, about the same size, with 10 rounds of 45 ACP. Go subcompact, you're stuck with 6 rounds. Same as the single stack Glock 36 and 45 ACP. Sure, the gun's more manageable in size, but with less capacity and other equally effective calibers out there, it's not really wowing anyone. I'm not saying the 45 gap doesn't work. It does. But you're giving up a lot just to squeeze a 45 into a standard-sized pistol. And gun buyers have noticed. Other manufacturers like Springfield tried it with their XD, but eventually bailed. Glock's still making the Glock 37, 38, and 39, though only the 37 hit the 4th gen lineup. But who knows, this caliber might just fade away. And if it does, don't be shocked if it barely makes a ripple. Number 3, 45 Super. You know, sometimes even the best plans don't pan out. Well, that's pretty much the story of the 45 Super. Think about the 38 Super. Take an old cartridge, add more powder, crank up the pressure, and voila! You've got something that meets modern standards. Sounds like a solid plan, right? They did it with the 38 Auto, so why not with the 45 ACP? But hold up, before we dive in, the 45 Super amps up the 45 ACP's velocities big time, hitting 28,000 psi compared to the regular 21,000. This means your gun needs some tweaking to handle it, and you gotta get the right brass. Starline's 45 Super brass is beefed up, thicker, denser, and heat-treated for extra strength. And hey, if you're thinking about shooting this, talk to a legit gunsmith first. Dean Grenell came up with the 45 Super in 1988, and with the help of gunsmith Wiz Hinman, or Inman, sorry if I'm butchering the name, I don't know. They started with cases from the 451 Detonics Magnum, cut down from the 45 Winchester Magnum. They nailed it, getting velocities like 1,300 FPS for 185 grain bullets, putting it right up there with the 10mm in terms of power. By 1995, Ace's son Gary was cranking out mod kits for 1911s at their shop, Ace Custom 45s. By then, there was legit 45 Super brass and even some factory ammo. So, why didn't it take off? Well, few reasons. First, the original conversions weren't meant for any 1911, but as time went on, a lot of the mods became standard on most 1911s. So, people started wondering what they were actually paying for with the conversion. But the real deal breaker? Good old licensing issues. After Ace Custom trademarked the 45 Super name, anyone using it had to pay up. Springfield was down to shell out a bit for one model, but others like Smith & Wesson, not so much. And let's face it, not many people knew about the 45 Super, and even fewer were gonna buy a gun in that caliber. When Taurus showed off a 45 Super handgun at SHOT Show one year, Ace Custom's lawyer basically told them they need to strike a deal. Torres's response? They canned the idea and told the lawyer to hit the road. With no factory guns chambering it and the 460 Roland greatly surpassing it as far as ballistics, the 45 Super kinda just faded into the background. Number 2, 500 Special. Alright, so sometimes what sounds great in theory doesn't quite hit the mark in reality. Take 2004 when Smith & Wesson unveiled the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. The idea of a less intense round with easier recoil sounded smart. I mean, it's been done before, right? Shooters use 38 Special in 357 Magnums, 44 Special in 44 Magnums, and there were even folks shooting 45 Colt loads in their 454 Casals. So, cooking up a 500 Special seemed like a no-brainer. But here's where things got tricky. The 357, 41, and 44 Magnums all had a max brass case length of 1.285 inches, while their special counterparts were at 1.16 inches. The 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum, though, was a whole different beast with a max case length of 1.65 inches. Other cartridges in the 1.6-inch range weren't just Magnums, they were Maximums, or Super Mags. So, cutting the brass down to the usual special length of 1.16 inches would mean chopping off nearly half an inch. That's way more than the usual reduction. They decided instead to make the 500 Special a Magnum-length cartridge at 1.285 inches, which is still a pretty hefty trim. They also dropped the max pressure to a more chill 36,000 psi. They even got a load semi-certified a 350 grain bullet at 1,375 feet per second. Sure, it's tamer compared to the 500 Magnum's 1,800 FPS, but it's still packing a punch, especially in the massive X-frame. But the problem, this left too much space for the bullet before it hit the cylinder throat, which some say messes with accuracy. Plus, careful reloaders could just tone down their 500 Magnum loads to a similar speed. So no one was really clamoring to buy special brass or ammo that cost about the same as regular 500 Magnum rounds. The 500 Special basically got hit with a big ol' nobody cares, and soon disappeared from shelves and production. Who wants to shoot a watered-down round in the world's most powerful handgun, right? Smith & Wesson could have made a shorter X-frame specifically for the 500 Special, which might have saved it, but that's speculation. It's not completely gone, though. Some custom gunsmiths have modded revolvers to take it, and Starline recently brought back the brass, so fans don't have to chop down 500 Magnum brass anymore, but outside a few die-hard fans, the 500 Special was pretty much DOA. Number 1, 440 Coron. So, the 440 Coron is one of those ideas that's almost great, but not quite. The team at Coron wanted to push the limits of a 44 caliber bullet, so they came up with this wild idea. Take a 50 Action Express case and neck it down to fit a .49-inch bullet. Their goal was to match the performance of a 45 Super Mag for hunting and silhouette shooting, but keep it the same size as a regular 44 Magnum, and they actually pulled it off. A 240 grain bullet clocking in at 1,800 feet per second. Pretty impressive, right? But have you ever heard of this round? Probably not. And that's not surprising, since it was based on the 50 Action Express brass. It was pretty much designed for the Desert Eagle pistol. That rebated rim wasn't going to play nice in a revolver, and it turns out it didn't do so hot in the Desert Eagle either. The issue is the cartridge shoulder wasn't consistent, leading to all sorts of head spacing problems and reliability headaches. Even though it outperformed the .44 Magnum, it just didn't catch on. Magnum Research did produce some Desert Eagle pistols and barrels for the .440 Coron, and Omega Arms made a few AR uppers, but the general lack of interest spelled doom for the cartridge. Before long, both companies stopped making anything in .440 Coron, and now finding a Desert Eagle or barrel for this caliber is like finding a needle in a haystack. And an expensive needle at that.